In 2006, the small town of Ridgewater, Michigan was buzzing with excitement. A new shopping complex, the Evergreen Plaza Mall, was finally opening after years of planning and anticipation. For a town that had always been quiet and modest, the mall was a dream come true. Its glass facade gleamed in the sunlight, and the air was thick with the scent of fresh paint, new flooring, and polished steel. It was unlike anything Ridgewater had ever seen, spacious, modern, and full of promise. The grand opening ceremony was an event no one wanted to miss. Families lined up outside before sunrise, waiting for the ribbon cutting. Local news stations covered every moment as city officials praised the development as the start of a new era of prosperity. Balloons floated in the air, a marching band played cheerful tunes, and the crowd cheered when Gregory Vale, the man behind it all, stepped up to the microphone. Gregory wasn't a typical businessman. He was calm, collected, and almost unnervingly polite. With a perfectly pressed suit and an easy smile, he thanked the town for believing in his vision. To the public, he was the man who had transformed a stretch of empty land into a glittering palace of commerce. Behind that charming smile, though, were eyes that seemed to study everything and everyone. Calculating, cautious, and unreadable. People adored him. Store owners called him a visionary. Teenagers who worked at the mall's fast food chain saw him as a role model. Local politicians welcomed him into every committee and charity event. His generosity seemed endless. He donated to schools, funded park renovations, and paid for the new town library's construction. It was as if Gregory Vale wanted everyone in Ridgewater to love him, and they did. Evergreen Plaza quickly became the beating heart of Ridgewater. On weekends, the parking lot overflowed with cars from nearby towns. The air was filled with laughter, the hum of conversation, and the distant buzz of music from the arcade. Families came for the ice cream parlor and stayed for the rooftop garden that overlooked the town. The mall had everything: luxury boutiques, small local shops, a cinema with 10 screens, and even an indoor skating rink. For the first time in years, Ridgewater felt alive. But beneath the success, something didn't feel quite right. Construction workers who had built the mall whispered about strange late-night orders from Gregory during the final stages of the project. They said he often visited the site after midnight, inspecting the basement levels alone, sometimes staying until dawn. A few mentioned hearing drilling noises long after their shifts ended, though no new work was scheduled. When asked, Gregory brushed it off as routine structural checks. The mall's finances also raised quiet suspicions. Gregory Vale had managed to fund the entire project with almost no loans. For a man who had no prior fortune or corporate backing, that was unusual. Reporters asked him about it once during a press conference, but his answer was vague. A story about foreign investors who wanted to remain anonymous. No one pressed further. The mall's success was too great, and Ridgewater didn't want to question its new golden hero. The employees loved their jobs, but some noticed odd restrictions. Certain basement doors were always locked, marked "Authorized personnel only." The cleaning staff was told never to enter them, no matter what. One janitor mentioned seeing Gregory emerge from one of those doors late one night, his suit dusty and his expression tense. But when she mentioned it to her supervisor, she was warned to stay quiet if she wanted to keep her job. As months turned into years, Evergreen Plaza became more than just a mall. It was the identity of Ridgewater. Couples met there for their first dates. Teenagers spent summers roaming its air-conditioned halls, and older residents enjoyed the peaceful fountain in the central atrium. The sound of laughter, the scent of pretzels and coffee, and the endless shuffle of footsteps filled the building day and night. No one imagined that beneath the polished tiles and smiling storefronts, secrets were buried deep, literally. Gregory Vale continued to thrive, expanding his influence and basking in praise. But those who looked closer could see a man haunted by something unseen. He was often found standing alone on the rooftop garden after closing hours, staring into the dark horizon, motionless for minutes at a time. The night guards thought he was simply proud of his creation, yet there was something unsettling in the stillness of his posture, as if he were waiting for something or someone. Ridgewater had no idea that the mall's story had already begun to twist toward darkness. The polished marble floors would one day be covered in dust, the shining glass shattered, and the laughter that once echoed through its halls would turn into silence. Gregory Vale had given Ridgewater its brightest dream, but hidden beneath the foundations was the beginning of its slow and deliberate ruin. 3 years after the triumphant opening of Evergreen Plaza Mall, Ridgewater's pride and joy began to show cracks, small ones at first, the kind most people ignored. A few flickering lights in the parking lot, a broken escalator that never seemed to stay fixed, a faint smell of mildew coming from the lower level. Shoppers chalked it up to age, the natural wear of a busy place. But in the quiet hours after closing, when the crowds were gone and the lights dimmed, the mall felt different, too still, too heavy, as if the air itself carried a secret. It was during one of those nights that Martin Deeks, the mall's longtime night guard, disappeared. Martin was known by everyone who worked there. He was a soft-spoken man in his 50s, reliable, and never missed a shift. For 6 years, he had walked the empty corridors of Evergreen Plaza, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, the sound of his boots echoing softly on the tile. He was meticulous about his job, keeping logs of every noise and every door he checked. When someone like him vanished, people noticed immediately. On the morning of November 12, 2009, the day shift guards arrived to find Martin's patrol incomplete. His flashlight was discovered lying near the service hallway by the loading dock, still on. His radio sat beside it, silent but operational. His car was parked in its usual space behind the building. Nothing appeared stolen, and there were no signs of a struggle. The last security camera footage showed him walking down a dimly lit hallway near the maintenance rooms at 2:13 a.m. He turned a corner and then vanished from view. No camera ever captured him leaving. The Ridgewater Police Department launched a full investigation. Officers combed through every inch of the mall, from the food court to the storage basements. Canine units were brought in but found nothing. It was as if Martin Deeks had simply ceased to exist within those walls. The mall closed for one day, the first time since its grand opening. For the town, it was a shock. Everyone knew Martin. He'd been part of the mall's rhythm. A familiar presence seen pacing through the glass doors after closing. His absence left an eerie silence behind. Speculation spread quickly. Some claimed Martin had been having financial troubles and had run away. Others whispered about something darker, that he'd stumbled upon a break-in or seen something he shouldn't have. Employees mentioned hearing odd sounds coming from the lower maintenance levels in the days before he vanished. Metal clanging, faint drilling, the distant hum of machinery when no work was scheduled. When one cleaner mentioned it to management, she was told not to worry about routine maintenance. Yet, no maintenance requests for that area were ever filed. Gregory Vale, the mall's founder, appeared before reporters 3 days later. Calm and composed as always, he expressed sorrow for the missing guard, calling him a valued member of the Evergreen family. He assured everyone that the incident was under control and that the mall was fully cooperating with authorities. Within a week, business returned to normal. Decorations went up for the holiday season, music played in the background, and shoppers filled the halls again. The disappearance was treated as an unfortunate mystery, nothing more. But not everyone believed that. Among them was Clara Niven, a local journalist for the Ridgewater Chronicle. She had covered Evergreen Plaza's opening years earlier and had always found Gregory Vale strangely guarded about his background. The disappearance of Martin Deeks reignited her curiosity. She began to dig into Gregory's business history, hoping to find a clue. Her research led her to a series of companies across the Midwest, all connected to construction projects, each one involving Gregory in some capacity. Oddly, every project had ended in disaster. Fires, structural collapses, unexplained accidents. Each time, Gregory Vale had collected large insurance payouts and vanished from public view, only to resurface under a new company name. While Clara pieced this together, the atmosphere inside the mall began to change. Employees spoke in hushed tones about flickering lights, sudden power failures, and strange noises in the service hallways. Security guards reported hearing footsteps when they were alone. One guard swore he heard heavy breathing echoing through the vents at night. No one wanted to be the last to leave after closing anymore. The mall's once cheerful glow had taken on a colder tone, the kind that made even the most loyal workers uneasy. Then out of nowhere, Gregory Vale announced an ambitious plan to expand Evergreen Plaza. He spoke of adding new floors, luxury spaces, and an extended parking garage, an expansion so large it would double the mall's size. The timing felt strange. The disappearance of Martin Deeks was still fresh in people's minds. When reporters questioned whether the mystery had anything to do with the expansion, Gregory brushed it off as coincidence. The police investigation into Martin's case went cold within months. With no evidence of foul play, and no trace of the missing man. The file was quietly closed. Ridgewater tried to move on, though whispers persisted. Employees said certain areas of the basement were sealed off after his disappearance. When asked why, supervisors said it was for safety renovations. Still, some swore they heard faint tapping or muffled noises from behind those closed doors. As the mall's lights shone bright for the holidays, few noticed the shadow beneath the surface growing larger. Clara Niven was already connecting dots that no one else dared to see, and she was beginning to understand that Martin Deeks might not have been a random disappearance at all, but the first victim of something far more deliberate. By the time Clara Niven began her investigation, Evergreen Plaza had already started losing its shine. Several stores had closed, claiming high rent and strange management practices. The once bustling food court had half-empty tables, and the maintenance team was frequently called to repair leaks and power failures. Yet Gregory Vale remained confident in public. He announced more expansion plans, spoke about future prosperity, and smiled for every photo the press took. But to Clara, that smile seemed rehearsed, like a mask covering something rotten. Her curiosity about Martin Deeks' disappearance became an obsession. She spent weeks digging into public records, business filings, and old news archives. What she discovered didn't make sense at first. Before Evergreen Plaza, Gregory Vale had been connected to several large construction projects in Illinois, Ohio, and Indiana. Each had ended in tragedy. An unexplained warehouse fire, a hotel collapse due to faulty wiring, a shopping complex that burned down just days after completion. Every time, insurance claims were paid out quickly, and Gregory's name quietly disappeared from the paperwork. The deeper Clara went, the stranger the trail became. She learned that Gregory wasn't even his real name. 2 of his past projects listed him as Daniel Cray, another as Harrison Vell. The same face appeared under different names in public records. Each time the pattern repeated: build fast, insure heavily, disaster strikes, vanish. It wasn't until she obtained documents through a former colleague at a financial firm that she found the link that made everything fall into place. The insurance payouts from all these failed projects had been funneled into offshore accounts connected to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. That company was owned by someone named Galen Voss, a name no one had ever heard of, but the signature on the documents matched Gregory Vale's handwriting perfectly. Clara realized Evergreen Plaza wasn't a miracle for Ridgewater. It was a setup, just like all the others. But what made this one different was its scale. It wasn't just a building, it was a community hub, a symbol of the town's future. If the mall were to fail, the payout would be massive. But what she couldn't understand was how Gregory intended to cause it without suspicion. That question drove her to investigate the mall itself. She spent late nights walking through Evergreen Plaza after hours, using her press pass and a friendly smile to get in. Most of the security staff liked her and didn't question her presence. On one of these nights, she found something odd: sealed steel doors at the end of a maintenance corridor in the basement. They weren't listed on any of the building's original blueprints she had found through public records. When she asked an employee about them, he said they had been closed off years ago, right after Martin Deeks disappeared. No one was allowed beyond them, not even maintenance workers. That was enough to convince Clara that the truth about Martin was hidden down there. Over the following weeks, she gathered evidence and planned to publish a detailed exposé titled "The Man Who Builds to Destroy." The article accused Gregory Vale of orchestrating financial crimes across multiple states and suggested that Evergreen Plaza would soon become his next insurance scam. It also hinted that Martin Deeks might have discovered something in those locked basement tunnels before he vanished. When the story went live, it spread quickly. Online forums picked it up, and major outlets began reaching out for interviews. 2 days later, Clara Niven's car was found abandoned near the edge of the Ridgewater forest. Her phone was inside, the screen cracked. The laptop she had used for her investigation was missing. Police searched the area for days but found no trace of her. Her disappearance shocked the town. For the first time, people began to question Gregory Vale openly. Some employees resigned, claiming they didn't feel safe. Shoppers avoided the mall. The once thriving plaza started to feel like a ghost town. Gregory addressed the public once again, standing in front of cameras with the same calm expression he always wore. He called Clara's death a tragedy and dismissed her story as unfounded speculation meant to damage his reputation. Yet behind the scenes, witnesses reported seeing him furious, pacing his office, making frantic phone calls, demanding tighter security. The mall's lower levels were completely sealed off, and construction workers were ordered to begin structural reinforcements in the basement, though no permits for that work existed. Within months, Clara's article vanished from most online platforms, labelled as false reporting due to lack of verifiable evidence. The Ridgewater Chronicle issued a quiet retraction. Life at the mall tried to resume its normal rhythm, but nothing felt normal anymore. Some claimed to see faint light flickering from beneath the floors at night. Others swore they heard hammering noises echoing from the sealed tunnels long after the work crews had left. Gregory Vale had silenced his biggest threat, but the foundations of Evergreen Plaza were shifting, literally and metaphorically. Clara Niven's disappearance might have been hidden from the headlines, but her story had already set something in motion that even Gregory couldn't control. The cracks beneath the mall were no longer just structural. They were the first signs of everything beginning to collapse. In October of 2013, Ridgewater was drenched in rain that seemed endless. The sky stayed a dull grey for weeks, and the roads around Evergreen Plaza glistened with puddles. Business at the mall had been declining for months, but Gregory Vale kept insisting everything was under control. He reassured tenants that renovations were underway, that soon Evergreen Plaza would shine again. Behind his confident promises, however, the building itself was dying. Cracks had begun to snake across the parking structure. Paint peeled from walls that once gleamed. The scent of mold lingered in the hallways, and water leaked from ceilings that shouldn't have leaked. Shoppers whispered that the mall didn't feel safe anymore. On the afternoon of October 17th, a storm swept through Ridgewater with relentless force. Heavy rain battered the glass dome above the central atrium, and wind howled across the roof. Inside, customers hurried through the corridors, umbrellas dripping on the tile floors. At 4:46 p.m., a sound like thunder erupted, not from the sky, but from beneath the parking lot. The ground trembled. Screams filled the air as the concrete gave way, swallowing rows of parked cars into a gaping hole. Metal twisted, alarms blared, and the smell of gasoline mixed with wet earth and smoke. Emergency crews rushed to the scene within minutes. Firefighters and rescue teams battled the storm as they pulled survivors from the wreckage. 4 people were injured, and dozens of cars were destroyed. The mall was evacuated immediately. Police cordoned off the area, and engineers were brought in to assess the damage. What they discovered shocked them. The steel beams supporting the parking structure had corroded far beyond what should have been possible for a building less than a decade old. The metal had been eaten away by moisture, but in patterns that looked deliberate, as if someone had tampered with the materials long before the collapse. When investigators tried to access the lower maintenance tunnels to inspect the foundation, they found most of them sealed behind reinforced concrete walls. There were no records of those modifications. Confused, they brought in demolition crews to break through the barriers. What they uncovered behind those walls would change Ridgewater forever. Hidden within the tunnels were piles of discarded construction materials, rusted rebar, broken concrete slabs, and tools that looked burned or melted. The deeper they went, the more unsettling the discoveries became. There were sections of tunnels filled with blackened residue, scorch marks on the ceiling, and faint traces of chemical burns on the floor. At the very end of one tunnel, beneath layers of dust and debris, a firefighter noticed something white poking out of the rubble. When they cleared it, they found bones, human bones. The tunnel was sealed off immediately, and forensic experts were called to examine the remains. The entire town watched the news that night in disbelief. For years, Martin Deeks had been nothing more than a rumor, a missing name in a forgotten police file. Now, DNA tests confirmed the truth. The remains belonged to him. Beside his body were fragments of security logs, half-burned papers, and a warped keycard bearing the old Evergreen Plaza logo. Forensics also found traces of an explosive compound embedded in the nearby walls. Enough evidence to suggest the tunnels had been intentionally sabotaged. Investigators concluded that Martin Deeks must have discovered the explosives years earlier, before the mall's opening, and had likely tried to report it. His disappearance, once considered random, was now reclassified as homicide. News of the discovery spread rapidly, reaching national outlets. Journalists descended on Ridgewater, filming the shattered parking lot and interviewing terrified employees. Protesters gathered outside the mall demanding justice for Martin. Under the growing scrutiny, Gregory Vale refused interviews. His lawyers released brief statements denying any wrongdoing, claiming that the collapse was an unfortunate engineering flaw. But privately, investigators began piecing together something far more sinister. They learned that the same cheap, corroding materials found in Evergreen Plaza had been used in several of Gregory's past projects. Insurance companies started re-examining old claims tied to his companies. A pattern of deliberate failure was emerging. As the investigation deepened, workers uncovered a second hidden chamber, even lower beneath the mall. Inside it, they found remnants of machinery and blueprints for the original construction. The papers bore Gregory Vale's initials, along with hand-drawn notes calculating explosion ranges and insurance values. Every detail pointed to intent. Evergreen Plaza had been built not to stand, but to collapse. The town of Ridgewater was paralyzed by disbelief. Stores closed overnight. Entire sections of the mall were taped off as evidence. Reporters swarmed the site, calling it one of the most elaborate frauds in modern history. The once proud symbol of community spirit now stood as a monument to greed and death. Amid the chaos, one detail unsettled investigators most of all. Gregory Vale had vanished. He'd missed all meetings, stopped answering his phone, and emptied his office before the collapse even happened. The discovery of Martin Deek's body revealed only part of the truth. The rest, buried deep within the foundations, hinted that the mall's destruction had been planned from the very beginning. For Ridgewater, the nightmare was just beginning. The man they had once celebrated as their savior had orchestrated their downfall, and no one knew where he had gone next. When authorities finally searched Gregory Vale's mansion, it was as if he had evaporated into thin air. The sprawling estate on the edge of Ridgewater stood silent, half-packed boxes scattered across rooms that smelled faintly of cologne and dust. The refrigerator was empty. His clothes were gone, his car missing, and the surveillance system had been carefully wiped clean. The only things left behind were a few papers on his desk and a safe embedded behind a painting in his office. When investigators cracked it open, they found neatly stacked folders, a small black ledger, and a set of false passports, each under a different name, each bearing Gregory's face. Inside the folders were blueprints of multiple buildings across the Midwest, shopping centers, hotels, and office complexes. Each had markings and notes scribbled in red ink, calculating estimated insurance values, structural weak points, and timelines for incident staging. The ledger contained columns of transactions linking Gregory Vale to offshore accounts under the alias Galen Voss. The handwriting was precise, cold, methodical. It was clear he had planned everything: the financing, the construction, even the destruction. Evergreen Plaza had been his masterpiece, the culmination of years of deceit. As investigators traced his accounts, they realized the patterns stretched farther than they ever imagined. Gregory had been moving from state to state for over 2 decades, creating shell companies, building projects destined to fail, and walking away richer each time. What made him exceptional was his patience. He waited years after each accident, letting suspicion fade before striking again somewhere new. He wasn't just a con artist. He was a strategist. Each collapse, fire, or flood had been engineered with precision, so no 2 incidents looked alike. Insurance agencies had unknowingly rewarded his destruction with millions. While the FBI began an interstate manhunt, Ridgewater tried to come to terms with the devastation. Evergreen Plaza was declared unsafe and permanently closed. Fences surrounded the shattered structure, and no entry signs hung where cheerful banners once advertised weekend sales. The air around the ruins was heavy, filled with the smell of rain, concrete, and decay. Locals who had once spent their weekends there now avoided the area altogether. Some claimed to hear strange noises at night, metal groaning, faint footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Reporters from national outlets flooded Ridgewater, turning the small town into a media circus. Documentaries called Gregory Vale the Phantom Builder, the man who built to break, and the architect of ruin. Each headline painted him as both genius and monster. Former employees came forward, sharing memories of late-night construction orders and mysterious blueprints that no one understood. Some recalled hearing faint explosions during the mall's early days, noises that Gregory dismissed as pressure releases. Now those sounds made horrifying sense. A year after the collapse, the case took another strange turn. A tourist visiting Belize reported meeting a man named Galen Voss, who ran a small beachside resort. The man was charming, soft-spoken, and carried himself with quiet confidence. He claimed to have once been an architect in the United States before moving abroad to escape stress. When the tourist saw his photo later in a documentary about Gregory Vale, She contacted the authorities immediately. By the time local police arrived at the resort, it had been abandoned. The man had left in the middle of the night, taking nothing but a suitcase. His bank account was empty, and his passport vanished. The room smelled faintly of paint thinner, the same chemical investigators had found traces of in the Evergreen tunnels years earlier. As months passed, Evergreen Plaza's ruins were left untouched. Legal battles over ownership and insurance dragged on. Eventually, the structure was deemed too unstable to restore, yet too dangerous to demolish. So it remained, a hollow shell of twisted beams and shattered glass. Weeds crept through the cracked concrete. The once lively fountain stood filled with rainwater and debris. Locals began to treat the place like a ghost site, a reminder of how trust and greed had collided in one man's hands. Despite countless searches, Gregory Vale was never caught. His name appeared briefly on international watch lists, but every lead ended in silence. Some believed he drowned while fleeing the country. Others were convinced he was still alive, quietly building again under a new identity. There were even stories of a new construction project in South America, funded by an unknown investor whose plans matched Gregory's architectural style exactly. Clean, symmetrical, and too perfect. Over time, Ridgewater rebuilt itself, but the shadow of Evergreen Plaza never faded. Parents warned their children not to go near the ruins. Teenagers dared each other to sneak inside at night, claiming they could still hear the faint hum of machinery deep below ground. Some said they saw a figure standing by the old loading dock, watching silently before vanishing into the darkness. The police dismissed it as imagination, yet even the bravest officers refused to patrol the site after sunset. Years later, as the town's population declined and new developments rose in nearby cities, Evergreen Plaza became a ghost of prosperity gone wrong, a monument to greed and deception. The story of Gregory Vale remained a mystery, a name whispered with both fascination and fear. Whether he died running from justice or lived freely under another name, his legacy endured. He had achieved what no natural disaster, economic crisis, or corporate failure ever could. He had destroyed an entire mall from the inside out, and with it, the heart of an entire town. Ridgewater's shining dream had become a graveyard, and its creator, the invisible architect of ruin, had disappeared into the wind, leaving behind nothing but silence and the echo of everything he'd broken.